when one sits in front of me as I'm going to share in awakening and says, I have seen the photographs of humanoids that are based in Antarctica.
The most important discovery in human history has been buried under ice for over 70 years. What if the people who saw it were forced into silence until the end of their lives? And what if the one person they trusted to reveal it nearly got silenced too? Something about Antarctica has never felt right. The secrecy, the restricted zones, the lack of clear answers. Now, an Emmy-winning journalist is stepping forward with claims that raise serious questions about what lies beneath the ice. Today, we uncover hidden testimonies, buried structures, and the moment everything finally connected. The call that started everything. The story did not begin with a headline or a public announcement. It started quietly in 1998 with a phone call that should have never happened. A retired Navy flight engineer, already in his 70s, reached a point where silence felt heavier than the truth. He had carried a secret for nearly 2 decades, bound by strict agreements and military orders that left no room for discussion. But as his life neared its end, that weight became unbearable, and he chose to speak. He did not reach out to a newspaper or a government office. Instead, he contacted Moulton Howe, a journalist known for handling sensitive testimonies with care and precision. Her reputation mattered. She had spent decades interviewing military personnel and scientists, building trust in circles where information rarely leaves the room. When he chose her, it was not random. It was deliberate. He needed someone who would listen, verify, and protect the truth until the time was right. During that call, he did not speak in vague terms. He described a specific event from 1982 when he was part of a mission in Antarctica. His tone was direct, controlled, but there was something else beneath it. Relief. After years of silence, he was finally saying out loud what he had seen. He knew the risks, even at that stage of his life, but he believed the truth mattered more than the consequences. What made his account stand out was not just the story itself, but the level of detail he provided. He gave dates, coordinates, and names of crew members. These were not guesses or fading memories. They were precise, verifiable pieces of information. When checked, they matched real operations and real assignments. That level of accuracy turned his testimony from a strange claim into something far more serious. The most unsettling part was not just what he described, but what happened after. The moment his mission ended, everything changed. Intelligence officers arrived to meet his crew, who were then taken away for separate interviews. The authorities reclassified flight logs within a short time. The parties involved signed 2 extra contracts. The message contained 2 parts, which made it clear that they must never speak about their experience again. He executed those directives during his entire career. Most people in his situation chose to remain quiet about their actual existence while they performed their regular activities. The process of time brings about changes in what people consider important. Death forces people to undergo a process that eliminates their fears and only permits essential things to remain. The call belonged to him. Linda did not rush to release his story. She gathered multiple hours of dialogue to confirm every single statement. She understood the weight of what she was hearing and the responsibility that came with it. One witness was not enough to make such a claim public, no matter how credible. So she did something unexpected. She kept it private and waited. What she did not expect was that this would not be the only call. The hidden story would be revealed through the emergence of additional voices who each possessed specific knowledge about it. And that first call would slowly reveal itself as the beginning of something much larger than anyone imagined. The ridge that shouldn't exist. The event that stayed with the flight engineer for decades took place in 1982 during what was supposed to be a routine mission. He was part of a supply run across Antarctica, operating under standard procedures with nothing unusual expected. These flights were common, focused on transporting equipment between stations in one of the most isolated regions on Earth. Everything about the mission began as normal until something went wrong. Midway through the flight, a mechanical issue forced the aircraft to land on a remote ridge. Conditions were harsh, as they always are in that environment. Strong winds battered the aircraft, and temperatures were dangerously low. The crew's priority was simple: fix the problem quickly and leave. There was no reason to stay longer than necessary in a place where even a small delay could become life-threatening. While the crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer stepped away for a moment and looked out across the frozen landscape. What he saw did not match anything he had encountered before. In the distance, rising from the ice, were shapes that immediately caught his attention. They were not random or irregular like natural formations. They were structured, clean, and sharply defined. At first, there was confusion. Antarctica is known for its extreme but natural terrain, not for anything constructed. But the more he focused on those shapes, the more certain he became that they were not part of the landscape. They were geometric, symmetrical, and too precise to be the result of wind or erosion. Something about them felt intentional. He moved closer, drawn by the need to understand what he was seeing. As he approached, the shapes became clearer. What had looked like distant formations now appeared to be the upper section of a massive structure, partially exposed where ice had been stripped away over time. The material looked solid and engineered, unlike anything expected in that region. It was not rock, not ice, and not something easily explained. Before he could get any closer, the moment ended. A command came through the radio, direct and urgent. Return immediately. There was no explanation, no room for questions. The tone alone made it clear that this was not a routine instruction. Whatever he had seen, it was already known and already off limits. When the aircraft returned, the situation escalated quickly. Intelligence officers were waiting on the ground, something that did not happen after a standard supply mission. The crew was separated and questioned individually. Their accounts were documented and then restricted. Flight records were reclassified on the spot, removing any trace of what had occurred. They were given clear instructions moving forward. Additional agreements were signed, reinforcing what they had already committed to. There would be no discussion, no reporting, and no acknowledgement of what they had seen. The message was not open to interpretation. That moment on the ridge was to be erased, as if it had never happened at all. And that is where the story should have ended, if no one else had seen anything similar. The pattern of witnesses. After hearing the first testimony, Linda did not move forward publicly. She understood that even the most detailed account would not be enough on its own. Instead, she focused on verification. Every name, every coordinate, every operational detail was checked against known records. The information held up, but she still chose to wait. What she needed was confirmation from another source, something independent that pointed in the same direction. That confirmation did not come quickly, but it came steadily. Over the years, more individuals began reaching out. They did not arrive all at once, and they did not know about each other. Each person came forward on their own, often years after their experience, and usually under similar circumstances. Many waited until retirement. Some waited until they were seriously ill. The pattern was not planned, but it was consistent. What made these accounts difficult to ignore was how closely they aligned. These were not identical stories repeated word for word. Each person described a different role, a different task, and a different moment in time. But when placed side by side, the details began to overlap in ways that felt too precise to be a coincidence. One of the earliest additional testimonies came from a geophysicist working with ice-penetrating radar. His job was routine, scanning the subsurface to map structures beneath the ice. But during one survey, he detected something unexpected. The data revealed massive cavities deep below the surface. These were not small gaps or irregular voids. They were large, defined spaces with shapes that appeared structured and deliberate. When he reported the findings, the reaction was immediate and unusual. Instead of curiosity or further investigation, the response was control. The data was classified within hours. His team was reassigned, and access to the original readings was removed. He never saw the data again. The sudden shift made it clear that what he found was not new information. It was something recognized and restricted. Another account came from a Navy construction worker assigned to a drilling operation. His task was straightforward: drill deep into the ice at a designated site. There was no scientific explanation given, only instructions. As the drill reached deeper levels, something changed. The material they encountered did not behave like ice or rock. It was smooth, hard, and metallic in appearance. Elsewhere, a scientist working in Antarctica described a different kind of discovery. During research involving ice cores, her team recovered samples that included objects or materials that did not match natural expectations. Each time something unusual appeared, military personnel arrived and removed it. The samples were taken without documentation, leaving no official record of their existence. Even pilots contributed to the pattern. One described flying over regions that were completely absent from public maps. These areas were treated as restricted zones, requiring special clearance far beyond standard operations. When questions were asked, the answers were brief and closed-ended. The message was always the same. This was not something to pursue. But when separate voices start telling the same story without ever meeting, it stops being a coincidence. The testimony that connected it all. By 2016, Linda had spent years collecting testimonies that pointed to something hidden beneath Antarctica. Each account added detail, but none of them fully explained what was going on. There was still a missing piece until a new source reached out. This source was a retired NORAD officer with high-level clearance. Unlike earlier witnesses, he had access to classified briefings and direct operational knowledge. He did not speak in guesses or fragments. He spoke with clarity, based on what he had seen and what he had been told. It quickly became clear that his testimony was different. It connected everything. He explained that beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of around 2 miles, there are structures that cannot be explained by natural processes. These are not irregular formations. They are organized, constructed, and clearly artificial. Their scale suggests something far larger than isolated ruins, possibly an entire complex hidden under the ice. What made this even more difficult to understand was the timeline. According to the information he had access to, these structures are over 12,000 years old. That places them before the last ice age, during a time when Antarctica was not covered in ice. The implication is clear. Something advanced existed there long before recorded history. He also connected these discoveries to Operation High Jump in the late 1940s. Officially, it was a training mission, but with thousands of personnel, ships, and aircraft deployed, the scale suggests something far more deliberate than simple preparation. The first surveys of that mission discovered ice anomalies that produced signals that proved the existence of underground structures. The focus of the investigation changed at that moment. Antarctica research activities remained hidden from public knowledge for 3 decades, which included protected area systems and secret research operations. He established 2 separate categories, which included public perceptions and actual events. International agreements allowed official research programs to continue operating in Antarctica, which displayed the continent as a scientific research site dedicated to international partnership. Research operations were running concurrently with activities that concentrated on recovery work instead of conducting research. The primary objective of these missions involved establishing contact with the structures rather than conducting structural assessments. Linda had already collected all the evidence when he testified. The locations matched previous coordinates. The descriptions reflected what other witnesses had hinted at. The restricted zones, the classified data, the sudden shutdowns of research, all of it fit into a single, consistent narrative. Scattered accounts from the past transformed into a unified, complete account of events. The investigation gained its first organized structure in years. The system consisted of multiple mysterious incidents that had remained unsolved until then. The system consisted of various events that executed operations and produced discoveries that revealed hidden elements buried under the ice. And once everything finally connected, the focus shifted from discovery to something much deeper. What was found beneath the ice? The accounts moved beyond detection and into direct experience. One of the most detailed came from a contractor involved in a classified drilling operation in the early 2000s. He was not there to investigate, only to assist, but what he encountered changed everything. He described being lowered into a deep ice shaft, slowly descending as the surface disappeared above him. At first, everything seemed normal. The walls were solid ice, cold and layered, exactly what you would expect beneath Antarctica. Then, suddenly, it changed. The ice did not thin or crack. It stopped. The surface shifted into something smooth and uniform. It reflected light in a way that did not match ice or rock. It looked manufactured. At the bottom, the space opened into a massive chamber. It was not natural. It was structured, deliberate, and far larger than expected. The scale alone made it difficult to understand. The walls were marked with symbols, not random scratches, but precise patterns that seemed intentional. No one recognized them, and no explanation was given. In that moment, it became clear. They had not drilled into nature. They had entered something built. The entire atmosphere of the surroundings created a distinct ecological atmosphere. The sound produced an unusual acoustic experience, which resulted in more pronounced echoing than people typically expect. The air created a feeling of weightiness, because it appeared as though the space had been closed off from outside airflow for a long duration. The instruments started malfunctioning because the equipment showed erratic behavior, which confirmed the presence of an unusual geological setting. He found his answer to his suspicions after he made his observation. A transparent entryway functioned as a main building element that extended through one wall of the room. The surface showed damage through a combination of cracks and breaks. The structure included a complete design that contained both borders and a door that connected to another part of the building. The structure functioned as a designated entryway that builders intentionally constructed. The team members from his group received instructions to remain at their current location. The new personnel who reported to duty possessed superior access rights and wore specialized equipment, which indicated their ability to reach restricted locations. The commander told him to go back to the upper levels of the building. He received payment after he returned home, while he agreed to extra contracts that required him to maintain confidentiality. He experienced a situation where no one provided further details about the matter, and people stopped discussing it while his presence went unnoticed by others. His direct account of the event, which occurred years later, showed that he did not need to explain anything further. The structure remained occupied because its design showed advanced architectural features that exceeded all known historical architectural standards. That realization stayed with him long after he left Antarctica behind. And what lay beyond that doorway was something most of them were never meant to see. The silence that speaks loudest. By the later stages of the investigation, the testimonies had grown in number and consistency. These were not random claims. They came from people with military roles, scientific backgrounds, and direct involvement in Antarctic operations. Each account pointed toward the same idea. Something hidden beneath the ice had been known for decades. But as the evidence became stronger, a different pattern began to form. The people who had come forward started to disappear. Some passed away due to age or illness. Others simply became unreachable. Many had waited years before speaking, choosing to come forward only when they felt they had nothing left to lose. The first major loss occurred when the Navy flight engineer who made the call in 1998 died. His testimony started everything. After his passing, only recordings and transcripts remained. Then came the loss of the NORAD officer, the source who connected years of fragmented accounts into one clear picture. Without him, there was no one left with the same level of access. Linda Moulton Howe made her decision after she understood that time limits would soon expire. She started to share her investigation results by disclosing coordinates, testimonies, and secret operation references. The goal was simple: make sure the information could not be buried again. Independent researchers attempted to confirm the details as they became known. Some requested radar data and satellite imagery from the identified locations. The national security authorities rejected most of those requests. The most remarkable response from governments resulted in total governmental inaction. The government provided no denial, no explanation, and no public statement. The only thing that remained was complete silence. The silent answer to this mystery reveals one thing that remains concealed under the ice. If even part of this story is true, then everything we think we know about history changes. Not slowly, instantly. So what do you think? Is this the biggest cover-up in modern history, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. If this opened your eyes, like the video, subscribe for more deep dives into hidden truths. And don't miss the next video on your screen, because this story might only be the beginning.